This meeting is being recorded.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the University of California, I want to thank you all for tuning in today for the 4th edition of the UC Virtual Career Series. My name is Aaron Jones. I am an alumnus of UC Santa Barbara, and I'm also presently the director of the Educational Opportunity Program here at UCSB. Around the globe, UC graduates are making an impact in almost every field imaginable. We are pleased to have an opportunity today to focus on the intersection of culture and career. I'm confident that the panelists you're about to meet will provide excellent advice to you to help you in your own career. Our panelists are tuning in today from across the state of California to share their stories and job search advice with you. As you will see in just a few minutes, these individuals are amazing, but in my opinion, what makes them especially impressive is their commitment to the University of California community and their willingness to share their insights and experiences with you. This program is part of a UC-wide effort to unite and support alumni across our 10 campuses. We aim to equip you with the information, insights, and connections necessary to launch, grow, and expand your career. After today's event, I hope you will follow the survey link to provide feedback on the event. The planning team is excited to hear your thoughts and ideas on what we can do to help support your career and professional development. Throughout the session today, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions of our panelists by clicking the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen or by emailing alumni@ucop.edu. We will try and answer as many questions as possible during the event. I'd now like to introduce our panelists for today. First is Jessica Chen. She is a 2010 alumna from UC San Diego and the founder and CEO of Soulcast Media. Also joining us today is 2007 UC Santa Cruz alumna Kelly Fong, who currently serves as the Chief of Staff in the Office of Mayor Darrell Steinberg for the City of Sacramento. And finally, we have 1998 UC Irvine alumna Jane Castillón. I have to make sure I got that right, Jane, who is currently the Disability Specialist for the Disabled Students Program here at the University of California, Santa Barbara. So with that, we're going to get started with our first question. We'll start with give an opportunity for our panelists to each answer the first 3 questions, starting with Jessica, then Kelly and Jane. So if you can take a few moments to respond to this. First, you've each worked in a variety of settings throughout your career. Tell us about what made a past environment a perfect place for you to grow. Then share with us an environment that did not allow you to thrive and how you came to recognize that.
Thank you so much, Aaron, and hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this career panel. So a little bit about my background. So as Aaron mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of Soulcast Media, and we are a communications and media agency. But my background actually stems from my career as a broadcast journalist. I was actually a broadcast journalist for almost 10 years until not too long ago, I eventually decided to leave and start Soulcast Media. But part of the reason why I decided to leave was because I truly have this passion for communications and wanting to help others speak authentically and confidently. And having worked in the broadcast news industry, obviously had a lot of great experiences, but also a lot of learning experiences as well. So to answer Aaron's question, what was a past experience and environment that made a perfect place for me to grow in my career? So as a broadcast news reporter, we had to travel and move around a lot for our job. And that means traditionally starting in a very small city, because one of the things that we always say is if you're starting out in news, you want to start in a small city so you make all your mistakes there so that nobody sees it. And my first job was in Reno, Nevada. And this was really challenging for me, being 21 years old at the time, living in a city where I knew nobody, but I was just there for work. That was very challenging for me. And obviously, it being my first job, I had to learn a lot of things while on the go. So that was challenging, but because it was challenging, it did allow me to grow tremendously. To answer the second part of the question is, what was an environment that did not allow me to really thrive? So I've also been in work situations where the environment just wasn't in my perspective, very healthy, in the sense that I've definitely encountered situations where there would be opportunities and it should be a fair opportunity amongst everybody there, but you would notice that those opportunities would go to certain people. And noticing this, you start to realize it's not necessarily fair. And once I realized that, I would address it, but starting to see that it couldn't necessarily change, then I realized I had to remove myself from that situation and find a new opportunity. But for me, that was an environment that I started to recognize wasn't the most healthy. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. Kelly?
Hi, everybody. Kelly Fong here. As you know, I'm a banana slug from 2007, and my journey has taken me from Santa Cruz to Sacramento, where I thought I'd only be here for a couple years working as a political consultant, but fell in love with the city and have found a lot of different ways to get engaged with the potential that's here to help make things happen, which honestly is something I think is key to developing the environment or working with an environment where you can really thrive, as if you see and feel potential, not just for you and your growth, but for the issues that you care about that bring you into a situation. And honestly, it's echoing some of what Jessica said, is finding that small place where you can make mistakes and grow and really test out your skills. For me as well, it was moving to a new town and not knowing a lot of people outside of work to take a political consulting job up here. And ultimately, I had the opportunity with some of those coworkers to start and grow a Democratic club based on feminist principles of inclusion, equality, and diversity. And basically having a startup volunteer organization allowed each of us to test and pilot new skills that maybe we didn't feel comfortable in our work environment or at our jobs, or we didn't have the opportunity. So I cannot recommend enough just finding those types of networking groups or clubs or volunteer organizations that you can be a part of that really do create that safe environment to kind of test out and figure out, what do you thrive doing? How can you really understand your interactions with other team players and get to know and grow your skills that way? And in terms of, an environment that didn't really allow me to thrive, it took me a while to figure that out in a couple different situations. I've got the personality that I'm very adaptable to situations, which oftentimes can be a real strength in being flexible, but you've got to recognize when it starts to hinder your own ability to grow. And that can be difficult to understand when you are willing to be adaptable and be a team player. But a few things that you can look for is if there's something that you've been really passionate about or an issue that you're working on, and for whatever reason, you just aren't feeling it anymore. Maybe you're thinking it's just not your cup of tea once you got a few layers in, and that's okay. But pay attention if it's your work environment that's draining your energy and your focus on it, so that instead of seeing the issue for what it is and what you're passionate about, you're losing it because of things you have to deal with at work. And I think another cue that helps identify that is just if you spend more time kind of complaining and talking about the work process or the people at work rather than the issue itself at hand, that's a good signal for a place where you're not really going to thrive.
Right on. Thank you, Kelly. And Jane?
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Jane Castillón, and as Aaron noted, I am an alumni of UC Irvine, class of 1998. I've had the opportunity to work at UC San Diego, UCLA, UC Irvine, and I've been at UC Santa Barbara for the past 12 years. I completed graduate training at Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, and I am currently, in addition to being a disability specialist whose caseload consists of students impacted by psychological disabilities, I'm also faculty at a local graduate program where I work and teach students that are interested in pursuing their LPCC degrees as well as their LMST degrees. I also serve on the Association of Higher Education Board, the Red SIG board. It's a nationally elected position, and the focus there is racial and ethnic diversity and disability. So we're looking at the intersection of how race and ethnicity plays into disability. In terms of what I have experienced as the perfect place to grow, or what has contributed to that, I think I look for general themes, and for me, that has been a position or positions, a history of, that has allowed for connectedness to ourselves and to each other, In terms of myself, how is my past, my present, and future goals for myself tied and connected in terms of my career trajectory? I appreciate places that offer challenges and promote intellectual curiosity, that foster innovation in terms of scope and work execution, and encourages goal-directed behavior. An environment that is also invested in your value as an individual, in your value system and your potential, and affirms your sense of self and self-efficacy for work. In terms of environments that haven't worked, or what has not previously worked or not allowed me to thrive, I want to say that for me, it was definitely early on in my career and work experience, and it was right after graduation from undergrad. And I want to say that I take ownership for those times in my career trajectory where I haven't thrived, and it had to do with a lack of experience. So there was this combination of being a first-generation graduate, being the first in my family to enter into a professional academic setting, and then having a mentality of what I call scarcity, in which I saw my parents both work very hard, and so I pushed myself to constantly work as hard, if not harder. I had a lot of people that had supported me and were depending on me. So I would push myself, and I definitely, echoing sort of what our other panelists have said, got to the point where I was feeling tired and fatigued and realizing that I was crossing my own boundaries. I also noticed a lack of balance and equity in how work was being distributed, where I was predominantly becoming responsible for a lot of the work in my position. And given that I was the first in my family to work in this type of setting, I didn't really have a lot of experience with how to articulate my concerns to my supervisor. I didn't have a lot of people that I could go to in terms of my friends and peers that were just starting sort of on this journey themselves. So what I did was I turned to a formal faculty member who is actually the ombuds at UCLA right now. So shout out to Kathleen Harris-Knoll. And she was a former faculty for a Chicano Latino psychology course that I took. And what she did that I found to be extremely helpful was she validated my experience in terms of what I was experiencing in that work setting. She challenged my perceptions and my way of thinking in terms of the responsibility falls on you, and challenged my perceptions and value systems around, am I contributing my fair share? And ultimately what she did was give me permission to leave. She told me it was okay to walk away from that position and that place that I found myself. If after speaking with my supervisor, we couldn't come to an accord, she said it's perfectly okay to leave. And so I did. And right before I left, there was this sort of renegotiation of my position and what they could do to keep me. But at that point, I had already accepted another position. So, you know, I take ownership in my growth. I take ownership in what I could have done differently, but it has certainly helped to have allies and friends and support, you know, as I develop my career trajectory.
Thank you very much, Jane. Thank you all very much. Very profound responses here. Kelly, we're going to start with you with this next question, and it goes as follows. The focus of today's session is looking at the intersection of culture and career. In your experience, what does being your authentic self in the workplace mean to you?
This is such a great question. I really used to think that it meant fighting for my values and really wearing them on my sleeve, representing the cultures and voices that have been entrusted to me to carry forward. Some of that pressure that Jane talked about in terms of your background and the sacrifices that those before you have made for you to really make the most of your opportunity. And I thought it meant leading with my identity as a young woman of color, of mixed ethnicity, and to really honor my authentic self meant being strong and leading with those identities and perspectives because they were unique to me and they were my source of expertise and power. But it took me a long time to understand that it's really being vulnerable. That's the key to being my authentic self. And I think for a lot of people as well. because really only once I was able to put down sort of the strictly professional shield and facade and, values on my sleeve did I actually feel confident in myself and my abilities and what I had to bring forward. When I was trying so hard to be strong and to be seen a certain way, I always had doubts and questioned my ability. It was, an important process for me to go through and discover as a young professional. And, as a young woman in a very competitive male-dominated field of politics, it made me driven to be the best, don't make mistakes, to really prove myself, never show weakness or certain aspects of my personality that could be misconstrued the wrong way. So I thought I always had to be really strong and direct, not be open and compassionate, because kindness was mistaken as flirting and attentive listening, was mistaken as personal interests. So I to the organizer, connecting with people, listening to personal stories, sharing your own. And I took it too far as what some of my friends dubbed key message Kelly, which was very effective but distant. And once I finally gave myself the space to be myself and to be vulnerable in the workplace, which can be really scary, I was able to really bring forward the strength of kindness and learn that vulnerability itself is a real strength, and to how to tap into who you are, what you can bring to each day. And I'd say that's probably what I actually felt, that I became a real leader. Before that, I just was filling and stepping into some shoes that I thought I should fit into, but it wasn't really myself. It was just a version of it. And if you're just doing a version of yourself in one area of your life, you're never truly bringing your full abilities and power to the table. So don't be scared to be vulnerable, lead with it, and let it bring you forward.
Powerful. Thank you, Kelly. Jane, would you like to respond to the question?
Sure. I think for myself, over the years in my experience, being authentic to myself, or being authentic in the workplace, I have found that for me, it is a matter of there being an alignment between the value systems that I share and also the value systems that are created within a department or within a workspace. So for instance, for myself, I value education, equality, service to historically marginalized and disenfranchised communities, autonomy, creativity, a place where I can be challenged and where I believe there's a balance between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation and reward, and an orientation to collectivism and social justice. In my current position as a disability specialist, I work with students that have psychological disabilities that need or ask for advocacy on their behalf. And so this is a position that fits well in line with my value system, my skills, my abilities, and my talents. And for myself, it's important that what I value is reflected, and I get to exercise that on a daily basis. I feel very blessed and lucky in that regard, that I get to do what I love. It also means, in terms of authenticity, that code switching, in both in language and culture, is minimized. And I think that kind of goes to what Kelly was saying about, who you are, and are you being an authentic person, or is there a persona or a face that you have to put up? So as long as I can be consistent across spaces, across different people that I'm interacting with and situations, I feel like I'm being an authentic individual. And, and that goes in terms of demeanor, but also, I think in order to be authentic, because I do value growth, I'm afforded the opportunities to be reminded of what my growth edges might be, and then provided with opportunities for that as well. Thank you, Aaron.
Right on. Thank you, Jane, very much. Jessica, would you like to chime in here?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of what Kelly also said is kind of the same sentiment I feel early on in my career. I always felt that I had to talk a certain way. I had to be a certain way in order to be respected in my industry. However, I think after years of experience in the work, what does authenticity mean? I think it's just really understanding your strengths and weaknesses, and being open to kind of sharing what they are, what you're strong at, and what you're weak at. It's okay if there's something that you're weak at, because in the end, we're all humans. So I think, kind of like what Kelly said, it is about being vulnerable, but also not being afraid to show personality in the workplace. Because again, I think when I was younger, I always felt, yes, I had to be, look, talk a certain way because we are in a professional world. And though there are, professional things that we do need to be mindful of, in the end, I always remind the clients I work with that in the end, we're all human. Like, we connect to each other through human experiences, through human emotions. So whether your experience may be different from somebody else's, you're able to express how you feel, because how you feel there is a chance that other people may have felt that way, though they may not have experienced what you exactly experienced. So when it comes to being like your authentic self, I really think it's just, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, being okay with showing some personality, and ultimately, if you're unsure about something, whatever it is in the workplace, just don't be afraid to ask.
Right on. Thank you very much, Jessica. Really appreciate all of your responses. I would only add to that just really quickly, I think, in terms of authenticity, being in a space where we can, if you can see this, to kind of express ourselves in a space where that's welcome, I think it's also very, very, very important. And I think something that we tend to do well here in our University of California community. The third question, Jane, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll go to Jessica and Kelly for responses. How can a candidate assess a company's commitment to diversity and inclusion during the job search process?
Yeah. Thank you, Aaron. I think that's it's wonderful to note that it is a process. So there's sort of the research that goes into when you're thinking of positions that you might be applying to. There's the application process in and of itself, and then there's an interview process as well. So there's sort of different elements to that. I think it's really important and very valuable to do your research, and that includes sort of word of mouth. Who's currently within that position? Do you know? Does anyone in your network system know anyone who works there? That's going to be a very valuable source for inside information. Check out websites, look at the application process and see what's being included. A lot of times now, especially when you're applying for educational settings, you'll see that you are asked to submit a commitment to diversity essay in terms of how it informs your practice, your teaching, your research, and you're asked to deliver on that in terms of a written essay and then as part of the interview process as well. I think it's important when you're doing your research to look at the current composition. And so when we talk about culture, we might be talking about race and ethnicity. There might be other types of cultures, religious diversity that's represented as well. But look at who's being represented on their website and to look at what initiatives are being supported and initiated. You can attach yourself financially to any number of initiatives, but is that company or that department actually starting something? So we say at home, or I say at home with the kids, don't talk about it, be about it. And so what you want to do is look for the evidence of that. And especially in an interview process, it's perfectly okay to ask questions and to put it back on that committee. What are the values of diversity and inclusion, and how is that represented on a day-to-day basis or prioritized within the organization? I think it's important, again, to look at funding, to look at what opportunities there are for seminars, for conferences, for release time. Do they bring in guest speakers? And, I think lastly, I would say that if you're testing fit within an organization, I would encourage you to introduce or to bring your authentic vibe to that, like to be yourself as part of that interview process and to check their vibe, to see how they're responding to you in the moment, to get a sense, it's okay to test the waters, to get a sense if that's going to be a department or an agency that's going to work for you in the long term.
Thank you, Jane, very much. Jessica?
Yeah, I think Jane hit the nail on the head in terms of, when it comes to the job search process, do your research. There's tons of information out on the web right now where you can research what the company's mission is, what they do in terms of background. So doing your research is really important. Not only that, research is important when you actually go into the job interview. And when you're interviewing for the job, ask the person who's interviewing you directly, what are some of the things that they do to include others? What's their stance on diversity? What do they do outside of work? I think these are great questions because ultimately in the end, while you're being interviewed for a job, you're also interviewing them as well. You want to make sure you're a good fit. And let's say if you are doing your research and you may not necessarily find what you're looking for on the web, that doesn't mean necessarily that that company isn't open to the idea of trying to incorporate more diversity or more initiatives. So that could be an opportunity for you if that's something that you want to take. So I think ultimately, yes, it's research, it's asking them and just seeing how they respond, because they should know that if this is something that you care about, they should know about that as well.
Thank you, Jessica. All important reminders. Kelly, would you like to chime in?
I don't have much else to add. These two have really nailed it. I would just say another thing that you could do in your research process and how important it is to make sure that you are asking those questions and bringing yourself to the table is informational interviews. You don't always have to ask these questions when you're in the process of a specific job or position within a company. It's perfectly fine to reach out and ask somebody that's in a position that you're interested in if you could go take them out to a cup of coffee, ask them about their path and their current job, and just get some information about what it's like to work there, what it's like to work in that position. And those are some really safe, easy places for you to learn more, to kind of understand what that working environment is really like from somebody. And honestly, anytime they ask somebody about their own path and they get a chance to talk about themselves, asking those personal questions, you build a rapport that lets you really understand how they interact with others and therefore open up a conversation about how it is working in that place.
Right on. Thank you, Kelly. I think you all have done a splendid job and really to help to kind of demystify what Jane appropriately articulated earlier is a process. In a few minutes, folks, we're going to begin addressing questions from today's audience. But we want to remind you to submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen or by emailing alumni@ucop.edu. We're going to get into some panelist-specific questions here. And I see that there are some questions that are starting to come in. See you, Monica. We'll get right to you in just a few moments. But this first question is for Jessica. And Jessica, could you, the workplace can sometimes open us up to conversations around challenging topics. What advice do you have for attendees on handling uncomfortable conversations?
So I would always say it is normal to have uncomfortable conversations. It's something that is expected. So the question is, how do you handle uncomfortable conversations? I always say that whenever somebody goes into an uncomfortable conversation, what normally arises? It's a lot of anxiety. It's a lot of nervousness because you are uncomfortable. So I always say if people are starting to feel that they're going into a situation and they're starting to feel uncomfortable about it and anxious, to actually just focus on the message. So whoever it is that you are approaching, let's say it is your boss and you're nervous because it's your boss and you want to make a good impression, focus on going into this meeting and having a message, an objective of what you want to talk to them about. Because I always say if you actually focus on the message, you're focusing less on yourself. You're going in because you're essentially the message carrier, whatever it is you want to say. So the other thing I always say when it comes to uncomfortable conversation is, ultimately in the end, this is what I always say, we're all humans. And I always find this so helpful that even though someone may be your boss and, very respectable, but ultimately in the end, we are all the same in the sense that we all feel the same thing. And I feel like thinking it from that perspective kind of lessens a lot of the anxiety because we feel this pressure because we have, let's say, epitomized somebody. So that's why we're nervous talking to them. But if you can kind of just bring it down to reality that you're just having a conversation with somebody and that you're just there to share something, a message, I think for me, at least that has helped in terms of whenever I'm in an uncomfortable conversation.
Right on. Thank you, Jessica. Kelly or Jane, do you want to chime in just a little bit on that question? You don't have to. There's no obligation. Just to give you an opportunity.
I think Jessica did a great job.
Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. So Kelly, how can employees deal with microaggressions or difficult situations in the workplace?
That's a great question. I've gone through sort of a lot of this as a supervisor and manager and also just as an employee starting out early. I think some of the best advice that I can give in this situation is that first and foremost, just take a breath. Just give yourself a moment to process some stuff. And one of the phrases that I've picked up from my current boss is that always be hard on the issues, but easy on the people. And this holds true even when it's about personal or professional conduct. It's really important to remember, as Jessica's talking about, everybody's human, and that each person and situation is unique, even if it's the same familiar trope or story of behavior. So just allow yourself the space to evaluate and understand both the micro and the macro levels of the situation that's going on. So that in a micro level, if you are the one that is experiencing the behavior, give yourself that space to take a breath, to understand really what emotions does it bring up in you, what's being triggered, why is this behavior inappropriate, explore that stuff. Don't doubt yourself, in this process. Honor those feelings, use them as sort of your stake in the ground that you can always come back to as you begin to put yourself in the other person's shoes to try and understand what it is that they might be feeling or reacting to, the pressures they're under. We're all just human. And know that just like any argument, understanding and listening to the other side can only inform and strengthen your own and where you are. And then on the macro level, just know your workplace policies, protocols, and culture. If there is a formal complaint route, understand what it is and use it. Don't assume that nothing's going to happen and that it's not worth it, or it's, this really scary thing. It's there for a reason. If we don't use it, it has no real power. So just create, the paper trail that's needed if you have to demonstrate a pattern of behavior, and talk with your supervisor about it. Whatever you do, however, I would say don't let it stoke passive aggressive behavior in you. It can be really easy to fall into that. It's okay to feel whatever the behavior brought up in you. Give yourself that space to do so, but then make sure that you respect yourself and your work environment enough that you address it thoughtfully and strategically, rather than in a reactive manner that can perpetuate rather than resolve the situation.
Right on. Thank you very much, Kelly. Jessica or Jane, did you want to chime in at all?
No, I think it was good. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, Jane, actually, this next one is for you. What are some concrete ways in which organizations can work to be more inclusive?
Aaron, could you say that last part again? More inclusive, I think is what I heard.
Yes, more inclusive. That's correct.
Sure. So I think in terms of workplace and work environments, I currently work in disabled students. So our culture here for speaking about disability and for speaking of culture is very open. We have conversations, either formal or informal. It's part of our value system here, and we have them with students, we have them with other staff, we have them with each other. There's a lot going on in terms of the climate in our country that affords us the opportunity to consider culture and to consider sort of different perspectives. But I think as we start to consider culture and we start to consider sort of concrete-based interventions, it's important that we initiate dialogue with empathy, that we listen, that we pay attention to the words that we're using in our conversations. I hear a lot of the students actually complain that have disabilities about other peers that might speak and say, my OCD is really bad today. So that's a way of minimizing someone who may have a diagnosis and a disability, to make light of it or to not really understand the impact. So words have impact, and it's really important to consider what that is. It's important for work culture, to consider that it can be used as a source of support and affirmation, and to consider how authenticity interferes with lived experience of visibility versus non-visibility in terms of disability. So if someone has a disability that's visible, the authenticity in terms of their lived experience, it might be something that they're habituated to, but for those individuals living with non-visible disabilities, the culture and the work might make it so that they don't disclose, and therefore they're not being or necessarily getting to express themselves in authentic ways that able-bodied people have the privilege of doing so on a daily basis. As we move to concrete strategies, I think it's important to look at the concept of universal design And for those of us in academia or education or architecture, we may be familiar with the notion that rather than attributing disability per se to an individual, we're looking at the shortcomings in the environment that creates a lack of inclusion for other individuals. And it doesn't necessarily have to relate to disability. It can be other ways that environments are non-inclusive. So rather than focusing on the individual, we begin to look at the culture, to turn it on to what is going on in the workspace, either communications-wise, space-wise, what is the infrastructure that's there to support individuals and workers, and looking at it from that vantage point rather than it being a shortcoming of an individual. We want to make sure that we're playing to strengths, to an individual's strengths, and determining sort of tasks and opportunities for growth based on those individual strengths. And we want to look at hiring practices. Where are you recruiting from? Where are you posting? There are, for example, the Association of Higher Education and Disability, specific resources where you could target a more diverse or culturally inclusive workforce. And I think that if we're going to emphasize in terms of practices in the workforce, if we're going to emphasize self-care, if we're going to emphasize flexibility or providing appropriate resources, that it should be something that we back up. It should be something that's not just talked about, but we model to each other how we take care of ourselves and make it so that it's okay to do that and offer flexibility in terms of working hours or work assignments, and that when we recognize that individuals are struggling, that we approach with empathy, that we provide appropriate resources, and that we find ways to make sure that the individuals within an organization are feeling included and supported.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jane. Kelly or Jessica, I want to also provide you an opportunity if you'd like to chime in on that question. Kelly's good. Jessica, you're all right.
I guess the only thing I would add to what Jane said, which was already amazing, is, if you're seeing kind of a gap of an opportunity, instead of trying to complain about it, let's say, nobody likes to hear about complainers. If you are going to do it, though, offer a solution. I always say, if you're there and you see a problem, try to figure out a way, or at least if you don't have a solution, just try to start having the conversation. I always say that's the first step.
Right on. Thank you very much, Jessica. So we're going to get into some of our audience questions, but first I just want to remind everyone participating today that if you have a question, you could submit it using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or you could email it to alumni@ucop.edu. Our first audience question is for Jane, and it comes from Monica. She says, you mentioned the concept of cultural code switching. Could you please expand on this and provide context on navigating this in the workplace? Oop, you may still be on mute, Jane.
Thank you for the reminder. So when I'm referring to code switching, I'm borrowing the term affectionately from language. So code switching in language might refer to one's ability to transition between, for instance, in my case, English and Spanish. And sometimes I might do that because the word in English is escaping me. Or sometimes it's been noted as well in research that when one is discussing memories that are particularly emotionally charged, there seems to be more connection to native tongue. So sometimes people code switch based on the content of conversations. When I am discussing code switching, I'm referring to language and I'm referring to culture. So for instance, I believe Kelly had talked about sort of changing who you are based on the space that you're occupying. So early on, I think I did have this persona that I adopted of what a professional person looks like and the language that they use to communicate and articulate themselves and how they present themselves. And so for me now, in order to be more authentic with who I am, I find that I'm being more culturally consistent if I can talk very similarly, not always exactly the same, but how I talk to students, how I talk to faculty, how I talk to the students that I teach, and the information and self-disclosures that I make about myself along the way, in terms of my career trajectory and what I have faced as a woman of color, as a first-generation college student. You know, I share those to offer strength to my students that I work with and to the students that I teach. So I think for me it's about consistency with who I feel I am and what I believe in. Does that make sense?
Great. Yes, great. Thank you very much, Jane. Our next question is coming from Michael, UCI grad here. Michael says, I'm currently working at a culture change company that's tackling these issues through storytelling to help individuals and organizations get aligned in their missions, values, vision, values, and purpose. What avenues do you see as major impactors in addressing culture at an organization? And this is an open-ended question. Either of you want to tackle that one?
Really interesting question, and also work that it sounds like you're doing. I'm fascinated by it. I would just say that some of the avenues that I've run into here working for city government, which can be a bureaucracy, or working at the federal level, which have various things that have been institutionalized for a long time, is that people don't expect change to happen quickly. And so there's a lot of apathy. Apathy within organizations when things have gone wrong for so long is really difficult to overcome. And you've got to address that head on by getting at what was the root of those issues. I hear from a lot of employees that say, you know, I've worked for the city for 30 years and nothing's ever changed. It doesn't matter that I've tried all these different things. So they're unwilling to put in the energy anymore because they feel like it won't do anything. And apathy is honestly one of the biggest sort of barriers that you can face in anything. I would say you've got to put in the time and energy to listen and to honor what had happened in the past, and to show and share why what you're changing now will make a difference over time. Just as much as disenfranchised or marginalized communities have been neglected for long periods of time, you know, one quick thing or injection will never fix it. It's got to be a sustained investment of time and energy. So I'd just add that.
Great. Jessica or Jane, any thoughts?
Yeah, I can add something. I mean, not completely understanding the context, but I heard the keyword storytelling. And for me, that word resonates a lot because that's something that I do work a lot with my clients on. And again, without really understanding kind of the context of it, but when it comes to storytelling and that being your mode of communication, the way I always say is if you are going to incorporate storytelling is great because it evokes emotion. Because again, we may not all have the same experiences, but we all feel the same emotions. So if you are in the path of wanting to tell, let's say, your company story or your culture story, finding a character, I always say, is the best mode to actually start the storytelling process, because this character, whoever it may be, will be the person who's able to kind of share their experiences, hence their emotions. So hopefully that helps when it comes to storytelling and how you can best approach it and adapt it to whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Great, thank you. And I would also add, just in terms of culture, Michael, that just the recognition that culture fundamentally resists change. And so that sometimes we have to kind of really be consistent and compassionate in our attempts to really just shift culture because it is very resistant to it. Okay, I'm going to move on here to our next panelist. Next question. Thank you. The questions, they're really coming in now. This one is from Marissa. It's for Kelly and Jessica. Marissa says, you hinted at feeling the need to be strong in a male-dominant in your male-dominant industries in the past. How did you transition to being more vulnerable and confident, a more vulnerable and confident woman in the present?
Okay, so I'll take this one first. I want to also just say the need to be strong and actually being strong can be the same thing, and they can be two different things. And you heard Jane talk about it a little bit in terms of the type of persona that you thought you had to embody as a professional. And that may be a completely different person than who you are when you're out with your friends or when you're around your family. And really, my misconception early on was that the idea of being strong meant not bringing my full self to the table and just diving in and really honing in on one aspect of my professional character. And I realized that I never felt confident when I did that in who I was or what I was saying, because it didn't tap into all of my experience and resources. And when I realized that being vulnerable and allowing myself to feel the different things that popped up rather than what I thought I should be feeling, that's when I actually felt more grounded and strong. And I would say have become a much better professional and leader and team member because of it. So I don't want to mix up, strength not being something that you can have by being your authentic self as a young woman. It's just making sure that you're being your full self and that you can stand on all that you are rather than limiting yourself in one aspect of it.
Thank you, Kelly. We have some more questions coming in, so I'm just going to try to get to as many as we can in the few minutes that we have left. This is from Gabriella. She's wondering if anyone has experienced tokenization in the workplace and how you have navigated situations like that.
Hi, this is Jane from UC Santa Barbara. I can say that in terms of my work environment, part of the research that I typically do into the positions that I'm applying for involves sort of looking into who's currently employed there, how long have they been there, and I do reach out to people within specific departments. That being said, in my current position as a disability specialist, I am the only woman of color that is occupying sort of this title and this role. My colleagues are all dominant culture European Americans, and there's just one other woman, and she is of Italian American descent. So I wouldn't say, though, that I experienced it, that my experience of being the only person of color in my position is that of tokenism. I don't feel like I am a token here at all. Our director is African American, and in that regard, it doesn't feel that way. I can say that when I was at Southern Illinois University at graduate school, in being in Illinois, it was predominantly sort of dominant European Americans at that university. Diversity tended to be African Americans, and I was the first Mexican American admitted to the graduate program in counseling psychology. So that felt a bit more as tokenism, and for me, it's something that I take in stride. I take it as I'm the first or the only, and for me, in order to survive in those settings and spaces, I feel like I have to flip the narrative and make it so that is a point of distinction for myself, and see myself as a pioneer that is opening doors, breaking ceilings, and allowing for others to follow in my footsteps. I really try to strip away sort of the negative aspects of those connotations and flip it to be something that I can take pride in and that can be a source of strength for myself.
I think I would add to Jane, because when I was working in several of the newsrooms across the country, there weren't many Asian women in the environment I was working in, but I never saw that actually as a disadvantage. I actually saw that as an opportunity, because I could use my unique ethnicity, unique in the sense of it being in the newsroom, and tell stories that I wanted to do or offer perspectives that others didn't have. So in that sense, I always saw it as a good thing, not necessarily a bad thing.
Right on. Thank you very much. And speaking of, this may be for you, Jessica, but I'm just going to, just regarding communication, but for all of us, obviously. But the question is from Alina. When communicating in the workplace, is it more important to listen to others or talk about your own experience? It's
a beautiful balance of both. I think you really have to start by listening, because if it's a two-way conversation, you want to really understand what the other person is trying to say. Because if they have a question, let's say, and then you start talking, they may not necessarily listen to what you're saying because they're still focused on whatever it is that they're concerned about. So I think being an effective communicator is actually being a very good listener. And also it shows that you just truly care. And again, if you show that you care, they are going to care as well. So when it comes to communicating, first, it is listening to what it is that they're trying to say. And the way you can respond is by sharing your own experience and your own perspective. So yes, listening is first, and then communicating what it is you're thinking, I would say, is second. And that's how you can have a very engaging and hopefully helpful conversation.
I would just add real quickly to that, everything that Jessica said is right on. And remember that when you're an active listener, so much of what we communicate isn't verbal necessarily. It's about your body language, the eye contact, how you're really being present with a person. So, don't be on your phone, don't be distracted, don't show them the stuff where you're, really have your arms crossed or you're furrowing your brows. Just show that you're listening and truly thinking about what they're saying rather than formulating your own thoughts and how you want to respond.
Thank you, Kelly. Absolutely. This next question comes from Lisa. Can you please talk about how one can balance humility and vulnerability with the desire to grow professionally and rise up the ladder? Good question, Lisa, by the way.
It is a great question. I'll just hop in real quick since I'm already off mute. It's always a wonderful balance in really exploring who you are and testing out the different aspects of yourself and bringing your full self in. Don't ever be ashamed about what your passions are and going after them, because that's sticking true to who your authentic self is. And there's a difference between being passionate and dedicated to something, including yourself, and being competitive for just trying to be the best at something. Really recognize when others are doing a great job, help empower them, because that's one of the best things that you can do in your own professional growth, is learning how to really enable others to do what they're good at as well. And by doing those things together, I think you naturally rise into different roles of leadership as you're ascending throughout your career.
And I would say, and I always say this, you are your own best advocate. You have to be able to say what it is that you're proud of. And if it's something that you're uncomfortable with because you think it's bragging, I always say the best thing is, if you are proud of something, be excited about it. And that's when you are able to show somebody what it is you did. Because if you're excited about, let's say, a particular accomplishment that you have, and you're like, hey, look at this, and you are truly excited, it's going to come off as excitement more so than bragging. So I always say that's the best approach.
Thank you. Thank you. This next question here is from Bianca. She thanks you all for modeling vulnerability and sharing your experience and wisdom. But the question she asks is, what advice do you have for new working professionals entering a working environment where you feel like you are fighting to be seen or heard, or experiencing ageism?
I think I will say, for this one, don't feel that you are incapable. The fact that they hired you to be there, to be working at this company, means that they think the world of you, in a sense, that they think that you are capable of doing this job. So to go in thinking that you're uncomfortable or you're not supposed to be there, that's not the right mentality to go into a new job, even though it may be your first or second job and you're early in your career. Always go in thinking that you have something to offer, because the reality is you do. You are a unique person. You have your own unique experiences, perspective, and they hired you because they saw this in you.
I would just add, don't be afraid to talk one-on-one with your supervisor or your boss and to say, hey, I feel like I'm having a hard time getting my footing, or having space to share my ideas in meetings. Do you have any recommendations for me and how I could do better in this? And look for some constructive feedback of what you could be doing. And it's also raising the issue for them to pay attention to, because in every organization, you're going to have people that are, top of the class, first to raise their hand, to always say something. They don't create space for others. And so recognize that and find ways that you can plug into that. And if you're that type of person, also kind of hold back and create space for others to talk. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Great. I see Jane moving.
I just want to add to that in terms of not feeling seen or heard. I would ask you to consider perhaps stepping away from the situation that you're in where you don't feel seen or heard, and think to yourself or reflect on other spaces and other times which you have not felt seen or heard. Chances are we've all encountered this at some point, and we've all developed a way to cope or an approach that we've taken that may have worked in the past, or at least something that can help inform our path that we're going to take this time. So just, sort of reflect on your previous experiences with that. And in terms of the agency or ageism, I would, they say kill them with kindness. What's worked for me in the past is killing them with competency. You might attribute shortcomings because of my gender, my race, my age, but what I always try to demonstrate is my level of competency and expertise, and try to win people over that way. That seems, sort of that competency and that kindness seems to go tremendous lengths in helping to forge and build relationships.
Thank you all very much. We're getting close to the end of our session here. I want to thank everyone who posed questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of them. But before we end our session, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to share at least one piece of feedback with our audience. Jessica, what's one thing you really want our audience to walk away with today?
It's kind of like what I said before. And for me, it's all about communications, because that's what I teach. And again, uncomfortable communications, it's natural. It's part of life, whether it's in the workplace or professional or personally. But I think, again, this has always worked for me. It's always been true. And anytime I'm about to step into a conversation that I'm uncomfortable with, again, it's just making sure that I'm setting the right intention, having the right messaging. Timing is important when it comes to communications, making sure that you are okay in a mental space when you're approaching somebody and you want to talk about a more sensitive topic. So again, ultimately, communications, of course, is so important, but being prepared for it all is, I think, a really good way as you move forward in your career and personally as well.
Great, thank you. Kelly, one thing you would like our audience to walk away with today?
I think it's really understanding that the true inherent strength of kindness can really propel you in a lot of different ways, and know that if you always approach it from that perspective of being kind and leading with that you always feel stronger in the long run, whether it's communicating your passions or really fighting for what you believe in, and to accept feedback from people with that same kind of attitude, even if it comes across as harsh and they're not great at telling you, how you might be able to improve through constructive criticism. Just take it as something that they have done you a kindness to take the time to tell you something that they think they see potential in you to do something better.
Great, thank you very much, Kelly. Jane, last thoughts? Takeaways for our audience?
Aaron, I think as we reflect on culture and career, and we conceptualize culture as having multiple components, more commonly it's thought of as race and ethnicity, but as disability, as religion, as gender, fluidity and expression. And as we connect these elements of ourselves to our careers and our career trajectories, I would love for everyone in the audience to feel valued on these dimensions and in these regards, that they add value to our workforce, that they add value to society, and that their authentic experience and expression of themselves is helping to problem solve and provide models for those of sort of the younger generations that are coming up. Maybe they won't be the first in their family, but we're providing added value and added dimension to problem solving in that regard. So I would encourage them all to keep the faith and to keep, being authentic in yourself, to work towards that as you progress in your career.
Great, thank you very much. And our colleagues, our UC colleagues who've organized this have been kind of side chatting me and saying, well, we want to hear from you too, But quite honestly, Jessica, Kelly, and Jane have just been so profound in your responses. I don't think that I can necessarily add anything to that. So thank you both all very much. And on behalf of the University of California, I want to thank you all for joining us today for the May edition of the UC Virtual Career Series focused on culture and career. It was a pleasure to connect virtually with each of you today. We know you are busy and we appreciate you making time to be a part of today's event. Please make sure to take a few minutes to provide feedback on today's event by following the survey link which appeared when you launched this webinar. A follow-up message will be sent out shortly and will also include this link. I'd like to also thank today's panelists for their time, generosity, and commitment to the University of California and to humanity, quite frankly, to coin Jessica. The stories, insights, and advice you shared today make me especially proud to be a part of the UC community. I think we all can appreciate that. I want to thank you all for joining us, enjoying the rest of your day. Have a great week.